Welcome back. After discussing the effect of America and Israel's relationship on making peace in the Middle East, we now turn to the question of waging war in the wider region. Many argue that Israel has become more of a burden than an asset to the United States, and claim that a new hardline Israeli government is an embarrassment to the Obama administration and could cause an escalation towards more wars in the region. Rosalind Jordan takes a look at the rise of a strategic alliance.
American forces fighting in Iraq, facing suicide attacks, and stalled in a seemingly endless occupation, have an eerie similarity to Israeli forces in the occupied territories. Fallujah or Baghdad, Hebron or Jenin, feels like a game of spot the difference. The reason is September 11th. After September 11th, Americans were told they were under attack, not for what their government had done, but for what they stood for. And the only country that echoed such claims was Israel.
If there's any people that knows what the American people are going through right now, it is the people of Israel.
Any Israeli leader after 9/11 would have exploited the idea that we and the United States are now targeted by global Islam. That was such a natural thing to do.
There were essentially a balance within the Bush administration until 9/11 between what we would call realists on the one hand and a coalition of neoconservatives, aggressive nationalists, and the Christian right. Just within a week of 9/11 itself, they had crafted a letter under the auspices of something called the Project for the New American Century. And this letter essentially argued that America's enemies in the region are the same as Israel's.
We stand by the American people and salute President Bush for his courageous leadership in the worldwide campaign against the forces of evil and terrorism.
There is no difference between right-wing Israeli policies and American neoconservative policies.
United by a view of the world divided into good and evil, the U.S. and Israel aligned their logic, methods, and tactics. Israel played a role in training U.S. soldiers for urban warfare in Iraq and built training camps that looked just like Arab towns.
They had the buildings that are typical for these villages, a mosque or just the very narrow streets that are also typical.
According to Israeli reports, the Pentagon sought Israeli advice on almost everything, from how to set up a roadblock to the best way to bomb guerrilla hideouts.
The Americans did reach many tactical conclusions that are similar to those used by Israel in the West Bank and Gaza, which is targeting leaders of terror groups, cordoning off certain areas to pressure terrorists.
And Israel's influence extended not only to how to fight, but also when to fight.
If you look at American policies in the Middle East over the last 8 years, it's patently obvious that they have not served American interests.
Al-Qaeda could turn to Iraq for help.
Secretary of State Colin Powell justified preemptive action, partly by citing Israel's attack 2 decades ago on Iraq's Osirak nuclear power plant.
The Israelis had attacked Osirak reactor and have become specialized in conducting a preemptive war. But frankly, Americans have conducted preventive and preemptive wars too. There's a real convergence of view.
A convergence that can be traced back decades. Israel's wars against Egypt and Syria in the 1960s and 1970s were useful case studies for the Pentagon. The open-ended guerrilla wars were a test bed for strategies that were later used by Americans to wage asymmetrical warfare in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia. It was during the Cold War that Israel's strategic role entered a global phase. Israeli know-how and weapons went everywhere, from Africa to Asia, all the way to Latin America. The influence Israel exerts over American policy was exposed last January at the height of the Gaza war. Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert called President Bush and pressed America to abstain from a UN resolution on Gaza that the United States helped draft.
America has all the money, all the resources, the political clout, and yet Israel seems to be calling the shots.
But now, with a new president and administration, many hope there will be a change of course, one that doesn't subscribe to Israeli methods.
As for our common defense, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals.
In the past, America never initiated anything without clearing it with the Israelis first. But America must put an end to this nefarious Israeli grip on American policy and start acting like an independent great power.
To help me dissect the influence of the Israeli-American relations on the questions of war in the Middle East is Professor Anatol Levin of the New America Foundation and Hani Shukrallah of the Al-Ahram Strategic Center. And from Boston, we have Professor Stephen Walt. Stephen, I would like to start with you. Your already renowned book on U.S.-Israeli relations seems to advance the argument that decisions by the United States towards Israel and the region are done because of the Israel lobby in America. But as we just heard from the report, there is a weight for Israel itself and how it influences the American policy in the Middle East. How do you balance both?
Our argument in our book is that the Israel lobby, it's a coalition of different individuals and groups in the United States that try to maintain a special relationship between the United States and Israel, have had a profound influence on American policy towards Israel itself, primarily maintaining a relationship of nearly unconditional support, but also over time have become increasingly influential in shaping how the United States deals with the rest of the region. We don't argue that these groups control American foreign policy, and there are times that the American government does things that these groups disagree with. But we argue that particularly in the 1990s and in the Bush administration, a number of these groups began to exert pretty profound influence in ways that ultimately were not good for the United States, but ironically also not good for Israel as well, and not good for other American friends in the region.
But you must recognize that Israel has become or has been transformed by Washington into some form of an American state, almost a laboratory for modern warfare. And hence, it did earn, if you will, its right to affect American policy in the Middle East.
I don't think that's really correct. There have been various ways in which the United States has collaborated with the Israeli military. That's what any ally would do. You'd try to learn from things that they have learned, the same way we would learn from other American allies. But the fact is that American interests and Israeli interests are not identical. The United States should be doing what's in its best interest, and we should be trying to influence Israel to act in ways that we think are good both for the United States, but also good for Israel. The problem we've had in recent years is that the United States and Israel together have been acting in ways that are not just harmful to other countries in the region, but in fact harmful to their own national interests as well.
Well, Professor Levin, I don't find it particularly nice to Israel, if you will, to use it the way America did, to profit from its wars, 1967, 1973, and from all its experience in the so-called war on terror, and then for America to turn its back on Israel.
But I must say, I see it the way Stephen does. I don't think that, on balance, America has profited from Israel. I think it's very much Israel that has profited from American support. After all, it hasn't been Israel that's been subsidizing America to such an extent. It hasn't been Israel that's been virtually alone, defending...
But it has become a client of... of America's interests in the Middle East.
I wonder who is whose client, actually. If you stay in Washington and, with open eyes, you'd often think that it was America that was Israel's client, not the other way around.
Actually, you did use one of those very sarcastic remarks, saying it's not a question of the tail wagging the dog, it's the tail whirling the dog around and bouncing it against the ceiling.
Yes, that was one of those phrases that made me unpopular in Washington. I should say, though, just to make my position clear, that I don't think that Israel simply dictates to America, even actually on Middle Eastern policy. One can see that, for example, from the fact that even the Bush administration did not in the end attack Iran and didn't allow Israel to do so. Clearly, if it had simply been up to Israel, then that would have happened. But Israel does, as Stephen has said, have an enormous amount of influence.
But Hani, the Arabs back in Egypt and the rest of the Arab world sense that Israel certainly played a role in all these wars it waged, some say, on behalf of America.
There is, I think, consensus amongst us here that there's we're speaking about a very special relationship between Israel and the United States, a very unique relationship. I think we'd all agree, and I know Stephen Walt agrees with this, and that this is a unique relationship that is unparalleled with any other relationship that between states and between the United States and any other country. So we have something that's very, very unique in terms of the amount of aid, in terms of the collaboration, in terms of how the two countries behave in the UN, in terms of arms and so on. So we have something peculiar, something unique. There is a sense I have, obviously, there is an argument that the Israeli lobby enjoys inordinate power, which remains a mystery. Why is it so powerful? And actually, part of the mystery is one wonders why, because good part of American Jews are liberals, and one wonders why they go along with the Israeli right to such an extent,
but Israel did defeat those Arabs like Egypt's Nasser and Syria, who were presumably clients and allies of the Soviet Union at the time.
Right. I definitely, Israel did enormous services in terms of America. I have a sense that if you look at America as a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know, there is America as it portrays itself to the world, and there is the imperial America, military America, which became so clear during the Bush years. I mean, this was the, and I have the sense that Israel is actually, you know, America's alter ego. So there is an identification. I think not only is there actual does Israel perform a service, but I think the ugly part of America identifies very much with Israel.
Professor Walt, William Quandt, one of the aides at the National Security Council at the Carter administration, wrote a book where he explained very clearly that although Israel did get aid from America, but when they looked at the figures, America spent trillions of dollars in Europe and hundreds of thousands of American soldiers died. And the same thing in South Asia, where it spends trillions of dollars, or at least hundreds of billions, and of course tens of thousands, even more, American soldiers died, except in the Middle East. So I ask you once again, why not accept the fact that Israel has been doing America's dirty work in the Middle East and thank it for that?
First of all, I think Israel's been attempting to advance its own interests. I mean, if we go back to 1967, this was a war that Israel fought not because the United States told it to. In fact, the United States initially, when the June crisis in 1967 first broke out, the United States sort of put a red light up and didn't want the Israelis to do anything. And then I think you can make a case during the Cold War that Israel was something of a strategic asset by being a tool that the United States could use, primarily by just giving it lots of military aid to defeat Soviet-backed clients. That's certainly, I think, the way Henry Kissinger viewed it at the time. The point is that the Cold War has now been over for a long time, and giving Israel unconditional support now is not making the United States any safer.
But Israel certainly claims to be an asset in the war on terror.
Yes, but it's clearly not an asset in the war on terror, because it is our unconditional support for Israel that's one of the reasons we have a terrorism problem in the first place. So I think it's hard to make the argument that the special relationship is a powerful strategic asset for the United States. Our strategic position in the Middle East would in fact be better if we had a normal relationship with Israel, if we treated it like other democracies, and if we took a more even-handed position to end the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. That would help the American position much more than sending Israel more military or economic aid.
Professor Levine, I understand that you agree with that. You actually argued that the neoconservatives in America had so much influence on that part of the last 15 years that Professor Walt is talking about, meaning Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush and even Reagan. They're the ones who've been the bosses. And all the rest of the lobby actually worked for them.
Well, there was a confluence of interests under the Bush administration. I mean, Rumsfeld and Cheney had an American imperial vision of going out to dominate as much of the world as possible.
And they used the neoconservatives for that end.
No, I mean, I think they used each other. I mean, that went together with the neoconservatives, who, I mean, to be fair to the neoconservatives, I mean, what you have to understand about people like the neoconservatives, but a great many people in Washington, is that they genuinely cannot tell the difference between America and Israel. You know, they have deceived themselves because, frankly, if they could look at it square, it would be so painful and so embarrassing for them. They cannot bear to look at the fact that actually these are different countries with different interests. So they pretend to themselves, they have to given their position, that Israel and America are essentially the same country with the same interests.
But now that we have President Obama, Hani Shukrallah, do you think Israel is going to have an influence in affecting America's policy towards Iran, perhaps starting a first attack on Iran?
I think that will be the thing to watch. I think because on the longer term, it's very difficult to predict how things will work out. I mean, on the longer term, one wonders whether Obama is actually, especially with the financial crisis, whether Obama is actually a new America is being born. But in the immediate term, actually the big issue will be Iran.
And at the same time, Obama would like to start a dialogue with both Iran and Syria.
Exactly. So there is a contradiction. Whether the Israelis will be able to impose their agenda or Obama will tell them, and I believe he has the power to do it. I do not believe either the Israeli lobby or Israel can flaunt an American position, a clearly stated and clearly taken.
Professor Walt, who do you think is going to be calling the shots next in the Middle East, while we watch how Israel and America are reacting quite differently to their vision of a new Middle East or their presence in it?
I think there's no question that the Obama administration will want to take a very different approach than the one taken by the Bush administration, and possibly even somewhat different from the Clinton administration. And Obama made that clear in the campaign. The real question is where that's going to be on his list of priorities. I think Iran is one of the issues that he wants to try diplomacy first, and if he tries that in, I think, a genuine way, in a serious way, I think he's likely to be successful, which means the impetus for going to war would go away. That's not going to make Israel particularly happy, but I think in this case, the Israelis will certainly not be calling the shots anytime soon. The second question will be whether the United States is able to put enough pressure on Israel to get it to stop settlement construction. I think Obama understands the importance of doing that. Whether he's willing to spend the political capital here at home to really do that, I think remains to be seen. One thing that is happening, of course, is you're starting to get a more open conversation now in the United States, including a conversation among people who are strongly committed to Israel, have a strong attachment to the country, but who also realize that its present course of action and the policy of unconditional American support has actually not been good for Israel either. So I'm somewhat optimistic that American policy is moving in the right direction, but whether it moves fast enough, I'm not sure.
Professor Levine, I would like to end perhaps with a bit of a impersonation of Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. What Israel is basically saying, look, you know, why don't you just say thank you and just go about doing your way? Otherwise, you're going to have to be doing the fighting yourself. You're going to have to stand there at the post. If we don't do it for you against Iran and other radical Arabs, America is going to be involved here with your military. Do you think America is going to be involved with its military in the region under Obama, or is it going to withdraw?
Well, I mean, the whole point about an attack on Iran is two things. One, Israel can't do it on its own. If you talk to Air Force experts, Israel does not have the power to attack Iran successfully on its own. So the whole point of an Israeli attack would be to draw in the Americans as well. Now, in opposing that, Obama has one really important ally in the United States, and that is the United States military, which, if you look at its record in recent years, has twice acted to block such an attack.
Anything it will next time around?
I'm quite sure of it, yes. What I fear from the Israelis in the Iranian context is not that they will be able to drive an attack on Iran under this administration, but that they will be able to frustrate or help to frustrate a reconciliation with Iran, because they will be able, through Congress, through domestic pressure within America, to load more things onto Obama's agenda to the point where Tehran says, no, sorry, we're not interested.
But I guess we're going to have to stop, we're going to have to end at this controversial note. Thank you so much for joining me, Professor Levine. Professor Wall, thank you so much for joining us from Harvard University. And Hani Shukrullah, thank you for coming. And I'll be back with a final note. It used to be so much simpler. For 2 millennia, the international arena was largely defined by empires who provided their clients money and protection in return for services rendered. But after 2 world wars and 100 million casualties, including over 6 million Jews, brought down old and powerful empires, those left standing have continued to act as empires in all but name. And the Jews who suffered from centuries of imperial nationalism became soldiers in one of the Middle East's client states. After America took over from France and the United Kingdom, it has provided Israel diplomatic and strategic assistance and over $150 billion in aid in return for its support in the Cold War and the war on terror. Alas, the true cost of the Americanization of Israel and the Israelization of America's Middle East strategy has been paid in blood. Palestinian, Arab, Israeli, and American. That's why if Israel seeks to live in peace and security, it must cease to be a colonial entity and an imperial client. The Obama administration would also be wise to end an alliance based on fear, messianism, exclusion, and the illusion of achieving security through military intervention in favor of security interdependence and international law. Now that's a change the world can believe in. Thank you for watching.